Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. We'll have more folks join as we go, but we'll kick things off. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We're glad you could be here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Amy Pacheco. I'm the director of the Media Tech and Data practice here at the 4As. We're really excited to have Pixability and friends joining us for this session. YouTube Shorts has rapidly grown into a critical platform for brands, especially as we see video strategies shift to mobile first, shorter form content. And agencies are increasingly experimenting with that format, not just as a means of increasing reach, but to find new ways to connect with audiences and drive performance. In today's session, we'll hear how agency leaders are evolving their YouTube strategies in 2025 with a focus on creative approaches, measurement learnings, and the role that shorts play within the broader video plans. So joining us today, we have Matt Duffy, CMO of Pixability, Melissa Sierra, EVP Media Integration at USIM, Chris Edmeyer, EVP Media Integration at 160/90. And with that, I will pass things over to Matt. Just a reminder before we start, we are recording this session, and it will be available in the coming weeks on our website for members to access. The chat and Q&A are enabled, so if you have questions, please do enter them, and we will answer them throughout the session. If not, there will be time for Q&A at the end, and we'll be sure to source them there. With that, I will introduce you to Matt, and thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Thanks, Amy. Really excited to be here today. We're here on a very interesting time to talk about YouTube and TikTok. As many of you know, we're 3 days away from an April 5th deadline for TikTok to get purchased by a US company or not. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, but we're mostly going to talk a little bit about how agencies are using YouTube Shorts and TikTok in similar ways, in different ways. And it's just great timing, right? It's right before some possible changes for TikTok, maybe not. And so we'll get into that. But we were talking before the event that it's great timing for all of this. Really quick introduction to us. If you don't know us, we're at Pixability. We're a tech and data company. We're focused wholly on YouTube. And our goal is to work with great agencies like Chris and Melissa's agencies to help drive the outcomes they want on YouTube by making every impression matter. And so how do we do that? We basically have more YouTube contextual inventory than anyone and data on that inventory. And then we use Gen AI to curate that inventory to help campaigns run on the right content and exclude the wrong content. And so that you get really good outcomes. You get outcomes, whether it's driving, return on ad spend for Kind, or being over benchmarks for Subway, or driving channel views for Puma, et cetera. So all kinds of outcomes that as we all know, brands each want, specific outcomes. So that's us. But I'm really excited to be here with Chris and Melissa today. They're not only really smart ad agency executives, but they're also really cool people. And we're excited to talk about this. I'm going to start with a quick intro to YouTube Shorts. Many of you, I'm sure, know about YouTube Shorts, and Amy gave a quick, good introduction to it. But I'll give you just a little background before we get into kind of the TikTok versus YouTube Shorts discussion. So Shorts was actually launched 4 years ago in 2021 organically. We weren't able to target ads to it back then, but it was there. It was a format that YouTube launched that creators and brands could start to use. I remember when it launched, my company is obviously focused on YouTube. I thought, gosh, this is not going to compete with TikTok. TikTok is just got this kind of figured out. And YouTube really has done a great job of integrating Shorts into everything they do. And they already had the highest viewership of video. So they've done a really good job of making Shorts really successful. And we'll show you what that means in terms of reach and so forth. And so again, it's just vertical video content, short content like TikTok. Originally, they capped any short as something that was 60 seconds or less. They then increased that to 3 minutes. But for ads, it's still ads are 6 to 60 seconds on short. So that's kind of the basics on shorts. And again, it's grown really quickly. Launched in 2021. In the next 3 years, it more than doubled in size. It's grown a lot since then, of course. But again, I think what we saw right away is even before us folks on the advertising side could take advantage of shorts, brands got it and we're starting to create shorts content. Emirates is a good example of this. And actually, if you search for Emirates on YouTube right now on your phone, like all the first things that come up will be their shorts. I mean, that's part of YouTube's genius in trying to get shorts to be, as big as TikTok. Melissa, I know you've said that you've seen brands you guys work with using it not just for ads, but on the organic side, kind of understanding the value of this type of content, right?
Yes, we've seen brands really get excitable about having some quick snackable sound bites that really lean into how-tos, recipes, behind the scenes, just really not necessarily always thinking about the polished version of the brand, but also showcasing some entertainment to the brand, humanizing the brand, and really relating to those audience members that they really want to lean into and dial into having a connection with to understand the overall ecosystem of their brand and have some relatability to their audience and obviously receptivity of the message too.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you out there, presumably most of you are agency folks. There's a whole webinar we could do on best practices organically on YouTube Shorts, but you should absolutely be convincing the brands you work with to be creating their own organic Shorts content completely separately of what we're talking about for advertising today. It's a smart thing to do, and there are a whole set of best practices for that as well. So for Chris and Melissa and I, where we got really excited was back in December of 23 when you started to be able to isolate ads to shorts content. Before that, your ad could end up on a short, but you didn't have control over it. YouTube has all these formats, as we know, where it's a mix of shorts and, horizontal content and so forth. But starting in December 23, so really 2024 was the first year of shorts advertising. So it's new to a lot of people. And Chris and Melissa are really kind of have been cutting edge on this. A lot of agencies we talk to are sort of like, well, we've just stuck with what we know. And so I was excited to have them on board because they'll share some real things they've seen in the past few years as we've done, past year and a half as we've done this. One quick tidbit I'll share that we saw that was very interesting, even before you could target ads specifically to shorts. If people had vertical ads like this ad right here, and they showed up on a horizontal piece of content, they actually perform really, really well. And I think there are a couple reasons for this. It's first of all, it might be a surprise to some people to see it. And second of all, the content can feel a little bit more UGC because it's this kind of content. Chris, I know you had some thoughts too of maybe different people might react differently to this kind of ad.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Matt, when you look at the vertical content, I mean, if you think about the way that we're consuming media today, all of us, regardless of demo, we're consuming it on a mobile device, which is vertical. And so for us to begin to see vertical ads in these horizontal environments, it just feels almost natural these days. I mean, we're seeing vertical videos show up on linear TV spots.
Right.
And so it seems like it's one of those, it's a familiar video format for us these days. And so we take to it and we respond to it very well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, the takeaway here for agencies and brands is, don't be afraid to let your vertical format run in other places too. We're going to talk a lot about targeting shorts today, but if it ends up on horizontal content, there's no problem with that either. All right, so that was a very quick, high level, intro to YouTube Shorts. We could go on and on in detail about that, but we thought it'd be more interesting to talk a little bit about YouTube Shorts versus TikTok. We've had a lot of folks coming to us and asking questions. Listen, we've run YouTube campaigns forever, but not on Shorts, and we've run TikTok campaigns forever. We can't mentally kind of bring the two together, and we need your help. And that's why we pulled this webinar together, because we're getting more and more of those questions lately. And so again, that's why we brought Chris and Melissa here, because they've been sort of on the edge of this stuff. So here we are, 3 days before the deadline. We're seeing all these headlines. Is TikTok getting banned? We'll walk you through the timeline again. Is TikTok getting banned or not? Vance expects a deal by deadline. Melissa mentioned before we got on today that there may be an announcement today. The other thing that's happening is US TikTok employees are pretty disgruntled right now, and multiple of their top ad execs have left. So no matter what happens, I think it's an interesting time at TikTok. Let's just say that. So just going through the timeline really quickly, it was 3 years ago when the FBI director warned us all that there's data in TikTok that a Chinese-owned company now has access to, and that's potentially not a good thing. And so a couple years later, after Senate and Congress both pushed this bill forward, Biden signed a bill giving them a January 19th, 2025 deadline to be bought by a U.S. company. And the goal was to have them be wholly owned by a U.S.-owned company. Since then, again, we've seen some high-level U.S. employees leave. But come January 2025, when the deadline hit, you guys will remember this was just a few months ago. It was a weekend and they got shut off. And I was surprised they got shut off, but then they got shut back on again. But that didn't mean that advertisers were all staying. Some were staying and some were paused and so forth. And we're going to talk to Melissa and Chris about what they did. But we've seen most people kind of stay with the platform. TikTok's a very valuable platform, and the agencies we've talked to have said we're going to stick with it as long as it's there. But what's going to happen next? There's no clear U.S. purchaser as of this hour today on the 2nd. And I believe Trump will extend the deadline even if there is not a purchaser. I believe TikTok will have an extended deadline, and I believe eventually they will stay here. But what does the road look like ahead? Melissa or Chris, if either one of you want to jump in on kind of your thoughts on what you think will happen here.
I'm sorry, I'm happy to jump in, but Matt, just to talk very quickly about the sale portion of this, I think the key element of any sale has to involve the algorithm, because without the algorithm, TikTok is not really TikTok. And I think the current ByteDance owners have indicated they're not selling the algorithm. That's proprietary. So it'll be really interesting to see if a sale occurs, if the algorithm comes with the platform or if it stays with ByteDance.
That's a really good point, and it also brings up kind of a related point of a lot of the things that have been put on the table have been partial ownership by a U.S. company, which doesn't solve the initial thing that was pointed out as the scare that there's a Chinese company with access to this. So that would still be a piece of the puzzle potentially. So again, whether the algorithm is part of it, whether it's fully owned, are both things that could make this interesting. Melissa, any thoughts on what you think is going to happen in a couple days or today?
Yeah, I think it's an attractive app because it really leans into cultural trends and really transcending across different communities and almost being a unifier of a distraction for many folks, building up communities on their own and just having more in common than unalike. So I think there's the attractiveness in that a lot of other tech companies will want to jump on. It always just rings me a little bit differently and weird in the sense that there's a lot of other Chinese owned apps that are out there too that have actual purchase data beyond just the purchases that happen on TikTok. So it's strange to me to just isolate one and not think about the others in totality if it really is an issue. But I do think whether it's today or a few days from now, somebody's going to inevitably buy it. There is substance there from just an audience perspective of understanding it. But there's differences to everything.
I completely agree. And I was telling these guys, I spoke to an audience of 100 people last week here in Boston that were all agency folks, and I did a poll. And I basically said, who thinks it's going to be bought, no problem, 2025, everything's perfect? Who thinks it's going to go away for good? and who thinks something in between, bumpy ride, but it will stick around. And almost everyone said bumpy ride, but stick around. Like, so like, I don't think there's anyone that thinks that TikTok's just going to disappear. I think we go through these modes of judging social platforms harshly or not harshly, and it's not always an even judgment, like you said, Melissa. So it'll be very interesting to see. So let's talk a little bit. So you all in the audience, presumably a lot of you are agency folks that are trying to figure out, you're either folks that are running just TikTok with shorts content, but you're not running YouTube shorts, or you're running both, but you might have questions about how the two can interact. And the good news is the creative is the same, which is not always the case. I know for other social platforms there can be some pains in changing creative and so forth. You know, Melissa, I know that you guys have seen this be pretty seamless, right? Just moving stuff between TikTok and Shorts.
Absolutely. This is one of our challenges that we had for a particular client, having strained resources internally at their brand. How can we maximize all the assets that they have available to them, but also take some cross learnings across the two platforms? Where are there nuances to the two, and how the audience is behaving and, more importantly, engaging and responding, versus where are there commonalities and where can we double down from the both? So we've seen some tremendous success, especially in being able to drive promotional activity, and then evergreen content. It just needs more creative hooks, knowing that the shorts are going to lead to more of that longer form content and giving people that choice.
Absolutely. And we might get to this later too, but Chris, I really like some of your thoughts on the different mindset that people can be in these two platforms. So, a very simplistic way to think about this is just, well, it's the same thing. It's a vertical ad. You're reaching a bunch of people. They're probably all young, and we'll get to the age differences with these folks. But I think you had a really good point about the mindset, which actually was funny in this event that I spoke at. The people said the same thing on the panel that we had. So talk a little bit about that, what you're seeing.
Yeah, I think if you think about how you use TikTok and where you use TikTok, 9 times out of 10, you're waiting for a train, or you're at the dentist's office and I've got 10 minutes, I'm going to go through TikTok, and you're in this sort of time wasting or time killing mindset many of the times that you're using the app. YouTube, you're generally coming to YouTube to find something out, or to learn something, or to figure out how to repair something in your house, perhaps. You're coming to YouTube with a much different, type of mindset. And so what we find is that people tend to react differently to the creative in either platform. The interesting thing about Shorts, though, is that when you're running creative on Shorts, it can be an invitation to actually learn more, because you can, direct people to longer form YouTube content in a format that, they're amenable to and that they enjoy, viewing. So you can almost use that as that invitation, here's the hook here, come over, watch some more videos, learn more. We're not asking them to leave the app like TikTok, come over to the website, poke around, you figure it out on your own. We're essentially saying, come over and watch some more videos. And people tend to take to that and really react to that much better.
Yeah, it like I said, it was so funny that this panel said the same thing. One of the panelists described how he uses TikTok and it's inline. It's when I need to like quickly scroll and occupy my brain, whereas YouTube is different. And so there are pros and cons to each. There are different modes that you want the audience to be in, and so different reasons to use each. And we're going to talk a little bit about performance differences too. So let's talk about the audiences a little bit. I think this is very interesting. Obviously, not surprisingly, TikTok's core audience is really 18 to 34-year-olds is sort of their core. I think that's what most people would think. Whereas YouTube kind of has an audience spread across all age ranges, right? You can reach some older folks. We're getting a lot more campaigns for healthcare companies and companies trying to reach 55 plus people. And so the one difference in age is just the kind of like there's definitely a little bit more of a focus on the 18 to 34-year-olds for TikTok. But that said, YouTube has such reach that its reach even within those two age brackets is bigger than TikTok. So more focus on those age brackets from TikTok, but still more reach from TikTok on those, or on shorts on those. That said, people question, are the 55-year-olds watching shorts? And you know, what I say as someone who is 50 plus, and I'm not going to say how much plus I am 50, but I give that, again, that Emirates example I gave before is you can't help but watch shorts. Like when I do a search on YouTube, I'm going to click on whatever video has results that seem interesting to me. I don't care what the format is. I don't care if it's short. In fact, I'd prefer to find out really quickly what I'm trying to find out, right? So yes, the long story short is they are, and there's evidence that they are. But Melissa, what are your thoughts on kind of speaking to clients that you work with about the different audiences of these two platforms? They're not the same platform just because they're both short form content. And how do you structure a campaign, accordingly based on that?
Yeah, absolutely. We really seek to maximize the reach and minimize the waste. And I think if you think about the landscape right now, consumer confidence is really low, inflation, all these challenges in terms of trailblazing brands really trying to make a go of the white space that's out there and really speak to audiences at scale and go against the competitive stream. This is where YouTube's been really helpful for us, because just amassing all the search data, the browsing behavior, visiting competitor websites as well, really helps us get a lot more precision story down for our clients specifically. And then we don't like to put all of our eggs in one basket. So we do like to add on TikTok for incremental reach and doubling down on specific things that, this audience sweet spot of 18 to 34 really cares about, and making sure that we have that approachability of the brand in a more fun, thought-provoking way that doesn't always try to enforce some sort of how-to or tactical approach to the brand, specifically from a messaging standpoint.
Absolutely. And Chris, how about you? What are your thoughts on just sort of the audience similarities or differences?
We sort of started the other direction. We started, more on TikTok and then moved into shorts. And I think really one of the reasons being was really a few reasons actually, total population and the potential reach, like Melissa just said, is massive. I think the YouTube targeting, is just so massive and just so, detailed, and just being able to tap into that for certain clients in very special industries, is just far and away, I think, something that's incredibly beneficial on Shorts versus TikTok.
Absolutely. And that's a good segue to I'll just skip ahead really quickly. In terms of targeting, there are some similarities and some differences, like some of the other things we talked about. TikTok does allow for targeting 13 plus in terms of age, whereas YouTube across the board, whether it's shorts or traditional in-stream, 18 plus. So that's obviously advantage for TikTok if you're trying to reach teens. Advantage for YouTube if you're, more of an alcohol brand and you want to be careful, et cetera. And both Melissa and Chris mentioned the Google data that YouTube has. This is obviously a huge advantage. Google knows a lot about us and YouTube knows a lot about us. And so when they say you're targeting a certain age bracket, they're probably closer to truth. It's not perfect, but they're closer to the truth. And they, again, can target people based on their search history, their visit to competitor websites, like Melissa said, et cetera. What's interesting is they both have these 3 tiers of inventory that they the way they're set up: standard, expanded, and limited. And so limited being sort of the smallest cut, and standard being kind of the middle one, and expanded being the big one. To kind of give both of them to give advertisers like a little bit of choice of like, how tight do we want this inventory to be in terms of, suitability and safety. What I will say is I think TikTok does a better job of explaining those 3 tiers and what's in those tiers and what's not in those tiers. It shows you what you're excluding in each of those tiers or including. Whereas YouTube, it's a little hazy. It's a little bit like, just trust us. This is the biggest tier. This is the smallest tier. So the smallest one will be, safer. And so a lot of folks come to us for help with that, with trying to understand, well, what other measures should I be putting on this? Because the suitability tiers, they're just not as clear. So I give TikTok the advantage there in terms of clarity. And then inclusions and exclusions. TikTok allows keyword and topic inclusions or exclusions, so you can target, content based on keywords or topics or exclude that. Whereas shorts can do that, but that you can also do placement level stuff, which is, it's a different animal in shorts than it is in regular advertising. So this is where we get to suitability stuff. So I'd love to bring this up a little bit with you guys, with Melissa and Chris. Suitability on feed advertising is a different animal, right? We've got an example of a feed on the right-hand side here. When you're advertising on YouTube, brands sometimes don't want to be on an in-stream ad on a piece of content that's something that's not suitable for them. Whereas some of them feel slightly differently if it's a feed, because it just means they're after or before a piece of content that may not be their ideal thing. That's not to say that all of them are totally cool with having something unsafe or unsuitable before them, but it feels different. Chris, I'll start with you. Talk to me a little bit about how you see agencies and brands approaching suitability on these two different shorts platforms.
So, I think you make a really good point about the feed. If you think about how you're using the feed, either on TikTok or on Shorts, it's essentially you're switching between separate pieces of content. So your ad isn't going to be embedded in, say, a web page that's an article about something, that's controversial. You're essentially, the next in line. So, a lot of times there's a clear point of differentiation or separation between you and other content within the feed. That being said, I mean, our clients are still very, attuned to it in terms of, the suitability, and we need to be very sure of the suitability of the environments at which they go in. But we find in, a feed type environment, it tends not to be as big of, say, a concern as it would from, say, web page placement or something like that. Last thing you want is for anyone to be able to screenshot a placement of your banner ad, in something incredibly unsuitable. That's almost impossible within, a feed type environment.
Right, right. And Melissa, how do you think about this with these two platforms?
I would echo what Chris said too. When it's a feed, it's that continuous scrolling, that mindless scrolling that he mentioned earlier before. So I think there's less, I would not say presence and resilience around it, but I think there's less reliance on the fact that, oh, you're going to be served next to the same thing. That separation sometimes is less worrisome from that vantage point, because you're just going to see the next ad. You're going to see the next ad. You do even recall it. And I know we're going to talk about performance in a little bit. But I think the challenges with TikTok are just, the less robust CRM exclusions, the challenging part of having granularity on an individual placement level. And then with YouTube, being able to not only tap into negative keywords, but also, past interactions, in-market signals, all that gives more confidence in the approach to seeing that safe content align with the brand and having more trust and ownership into it. But I also think that with the lower age group too here on TikTok, I think that you run some sort of a challenge to be exposed to other brands that maybe you don't want to be around, or other content that you don't want to be around. So there are trade-offs to all this. When it comes to organic trend behavior, no one's going to really beat TikTok right now in terms of having that finger on the pulse. But with that, if you're keeping up with the Joneses and being part of those trends, there are some you know, maybe some unsuitable topics or just topics that make seem people, you know, kind of have pause in terms of wanting to align with, but that scrolling mentality kind of overcomes everything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's get to, this is just a quick slide related to targeting where, you know, in general, folks have tended to lean towards YouTube just because of all the Google properties that we talked about. But as both Chris and Melissa said, it all depends on the goals of the campaign. There are things that TikTok can do better. There are things that YouTube can do better. YouTube obviously has the Google advantage. There's a lot of comments in the thread about the possibility of Amazon purchasing TikTok, which would give TikTok like obviously a lot of data for better or for worse, right? And then we're talking more about our personal data being with TikTok, which again is a good or a bad thing depending on how you look at it. It's very interesting. So let's talk about performance a little bit. So what we've seen, and we have a full insights team here that for the agencies we work with, we help them look at benchmarks and look at things that are working and things that aren't working. One of the things we tell people is what works well and not well on Shorts and on TikTok for that matter is video completion rates, if that's one of your KPIs or your brand's KPIs, does not work well generally in a feed environment. You know, folks are, as Chris said, they're in line, they're at the gas station, they're flipping through this thing. They are less likely to watch your entire ad than they would be on a horizontal video where I'm going to learn something, I'm going for a how-to, etc. So if you have a brand that says, we really want to get completed views on this ad, that's important to us, I would avoid both of these platforms, both with Shorts and TikTok for that. And you go for longer form, horizontal, etc. For click-through rates, we've seen it work better than horizontal sometimes and worse in others. It's kind of it's very campaign dependent. And also between TikTok and Shorts, we've seen TikTok do better in some ways on this. We don't run a lot of TikTok campaigns, but we work with clients like Melissa who do both that we work with to see how things are working. What it works really well for in both of these cases, in both Shorts and TikTok, is reach. So you get low cost reach. And part of that is given the nature of it, of people scrolling through, you're going to get a lot of people seeing that same ad in a short amount of time. So what YouTube has done is a lot of their new kind of AI-driven ad tactics will incorporate Shorts into it if reach is a goal, right? And that will bring down your CPMs and it will bring up your reach, which is great. Melissa, is this similar to what you guys have seen in terms of things that work and don't work on
Yes,
these platforms?
certainly similar. And I think that's one of the more pressing things as agencies we have to do is really tease out when someone says what their initial business objectives are, translating those into the right KPIs. And all reach is not created equal. All video completion rates are not the same across all different platforms. And so understanding what it is that we're setting out to do and the correlation of that message to the medium and its ability to tell the story truly where the audience is looking to gain that understanding of whatever you're trying to entice them with is really important to lean into, and then adjusting the right KPI around that. These are not set in, forget it KPIs. Everything is nuanced, as we can continue to say. And I think having that mind state of what you're sharing here today, Matt, is really more of that best practices that we're trying to lean into.
Absolutely. And Chris, I'm going to want your thoughts on this as well. But this is also specific to one of your clients, Melissa. But this is an interesting thing we've seen across a few different brands that we're working with where the awareness lift has been better on YouTube. And I think this goes back to what you were saying, Chris, which I really like, again, is the mindset of the people in. So if you're trying to change a mindset, YouTube, people in the mindset or trying to change awareness, people in the mindset of going to learn, going to engage versus going to just kind of entertain themselves. YouTube is a good possibility for that, right? So talk to that a little bit, Chris.
Yeah. So, going back to your previous slide, some of the things that
Yep.
Melissa touched on and talking about performance.
Yep.
Um, I think that what we have seen, and this gets back to the mindset, is we tend to see and we have seen some higher click-through rates on TikTok versus Shorts.
Okay.
But I tend to believe, and I have literally no research to prove this out, that a lot of it has to do with the way that people are using TikTok versus Shorts. And I think we're getting a lot of mistaken clicks and some phantom clicks just based on the way that people are just scrolling through it just continually. YouTube, you tend to see, maybe some lower amounts, but you tend to see higher response once they come over. So we're seeing
Yeah.
greater conversions, greater, lead generation when people do come over from YouTube Shorts. Going back to that idea that people are there to learn, more receptive to what it is you're talking about. So when they do click out and come over to the website, they're more apt to give you information or make a conversion or a purchase or something like that. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of that speaks to your slide on brand awareness as well. The
Yeah.
mindset there is a little more open, a little more, amenable to learning new things, and that's
Yep.
probably where you're seeing these increases.
Absolutely. I think it's a really smart way to think of it. And for each of you, we have one more slide to talk a little bit about where YouTube sits now. But just in terms of if you were to give advice to agencies out there that are thinking about this, obviously a lot of the folks on the line are just wondering what TikTok's going to be. But I think I've been surprised by some of the agencies we talked to that just aren't using Shorts at all. And I don't think anyone should be using just Shorts. Even though we're a YouTube company, I think that would be silly to not have TikTok as part of your brand strategy. But there are some brands and agencies that are still their social advertising is just TikTok and maybe Insta and Snap and so forth. What would your advice be in terms of parallel pathing with both Shorts and TikTok and any others? Like Melissa, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think for any client of ours, we're fortunate enough to work with many challenger brands that can hold their own against the Goliaths that are out there. But as I mentioned, with the low consumer confidence and inflation and all these other things that are happening and budgets being strained so much right now, I think we owe it on ourselves to make sure that the ecosystem is complete and not just focus on the quantitative, but the qualitative as well. Why are people gravitating to these specific platforms for your clients? What are the cues and the signals that you're reading back? What you don't see here is that there's also much more data points that are going to help us understand the different types of creative messaging. We tested 5 across both these platforms and are understanding too, as well as the bumpers and the longer form content. How are those all performing? The device that people are using, how can we lean in there? So I think, if you want to change reality for your clients, you have to be able to change your mindset and have a growth mindset too. And I think for a long time, as agencies, as brands, we've kind of stepped away from ascribing that 10% of testing mentality. And when we do say a test, it's usually $1,000, $2,000 to pressure test, but we don't even understand what we want to learn. And so I'm very old school, and though I'm very young looking, with the scientific method, state the problem. What are you trying to prove or disprove? And then tease that out and have the right conditions under all the different platforms that are out there to be able to tell you where you need to go and run towards. And I think that's the most exciting part that I feel about our business is being able to read those cues and just race faster and see what other people can't see.
That's great. And Chris, how about you for some advice on this?
I mean, I think if you're doing anything in Reels or TikTok for that matter, or Facebook, Shorts is a perfect opportunity, like Melissa said, to test. I think a lot of time the reason why we might not be utilizing shorts as much as TikTok is simply an agency operational one. I think a lot of times the question becomes, well, whose job is it? Is it the social team? Is it the digital team? Who's in charge?
Mhm.
And I think that, ultimately Shorts is in my view tends to be a social channel, which is tended to be purchased by a digital team, which in those cases, I think we need to have, social people begin to think like content planners.
Yeah.
And think about, okay, here's the content. Let's talk about, the right channels regardless of who's buying it. But I really do believe that, it will only help clients, in the long term to use a combination of both.
Yeah.
Because going back to your previous slide on awareness, we do see that it does work very well, when it comes to building brand awareness, building, things such as that. And it also works very well from a performance standpoint. So I think it's only going to benefit our clients in the long term to incorporate a mixture of both.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head, Chris. I think if you look at this, our final slide here, and then we'd love to take some questions from you all. Who should own YouTube at an agency, right? That we asked, we do this media agency study every year in the US and in the UK, and we ask people, what is YouTube to you? Is it a social platform? Is it a standalone video platform? Is it a connected TV platform? And this is what we got this year. The answer is yes, yes, yes. It's basically all. So especially for some of the larger agencies where they're siloed, they may have 3 different teams that would potentially want to run YouTube campaigns. So if you've got a video team running YouTube and the CTV team is dying to because YouTube has got higher reach on CTV than Netflix or Hulu or Prime, what do you do about that? That's a big challenge. I think we've seen, agile independent agencies have handled this in general better. We see some really smart holdcos figure this out. And now this smaller white bubble up in the right-hand corner is kind of the new one. Now that there are some demand gen down funnel options on YouTube too, you're seeing even some search teams that have it. I mean, there's always been examples of search teams that have had it just because they're using Google platforms. But so this is a big question mark. I think, Melissa, how have you guys handled managing kind of this, 4 different definitions of what YouTube is in terms of how you run campaigns for your great clients,
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a hybrid as well, of a mix similar to this pie chart, but our
Yeah.
programmatic team will handle mostly the YouTube CTV portion and all the programmatic other platforms that are out there. We also have our social teams that are really great, hands on keyboard, scaling campaigns, fast and furious. And then we've started to engage, in this now expanded partnership with you all to be able to really lean into your AI custom audience insights and also helping us really bring together the cohesiveness of the 2 studies that are being done on both platforms and understanding how the short form gets tested. I would say that there's no one size fits all. I think in many ways, we're trying to distill down where our clients are feeling comfortable. So if they're traditional linear approach and we're trying to move them into a digital, that might look differently. And that might be more of our programmatic and our hands-on keyboard social teams are really just trying to prove out that we can now take something that was a little bit more global reach and distill that down into more performance media, where we need to now make bigger inroads around awareness and start to dial up consideration, favorability, and really seem like a bigger giant. That's where we'll engage with partners like yourselves that can really help us scale the insights that we're getting and have that back end visibility into the YouTube wall garden itself, for us to be able to seem smarter, present different insights to our clients, and also be able to scale those results at a faster rate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, you know, each agency sort of has their different approach to this, and even between you two all, you've both got really great approaches that have slightly different, you know, nuances to it. Great. Well, let's you know, we have about 13 minutes left. We'll probably take, you know, a handful of questions, and then we'll let y'all go a hair early. Amy, any questions for the panel here?
Yeah, Matt and Chris and Melissa, thank you so much for this really great and informative conversation. Matt, building on what Melissa just talked about towards the end about not having really a one size fits all approach, I'm curious, maybe without naming names, but if there's like a category, an example that you can point to where a brand had success running campaigns with both short form vertical and long ads that yielded positive results.
Yeah, I think Chris brought this up at the beginning, but one of the fun things about YouTube is you can run a campaign that's got a CTV portion to it and a shorts portion to it, and we had that with we've done a lot of good stuff with both Chris and Melissa's agencies on that, but we also had it with an agency called Ignite with their Chicken of the Sea campaign, where they had some really great you know, shorts creative and long form creative with Jessica Simpson, where they were, you know, hearkening back to Jessica Simpson's mess up 10 years ago of calling chicken tuna. But again, it was just a good example, and we've seen it from Chris and Melissa's clients too, of leveraging all that YouTube has. You can have one campaign that's focused on shorts. You can have one that's focused on CTV, or you could have one campaign that does both. And that's kind of what the Chicken of the Sea one was. But again, the one that we just showed from Melissa, the results were there. The awareness results were there is another great example. And some of the ones we're doing for 160 over 90 with Chris are the same. So a lot of great stuff there.
Yeah, I just add to that. I mean, we've done some things. One I'll point to is we do a lot of work in higher education. And so, you know, when you're trying to convince a junior in high school to spend the next 4 years of their life somewhere, it's hard to do sometimes in a very short format, especially when there's a multitude of things we're trying to communicate. Generally, though, you know, to Matt's point, you know, being able to draw them in with, you know, something like a shorts to spark that interest, and then move them into longer form content to get them up to speed. This is what the campus experience is like. This is what you know, the programs we offer. This is, you know, what our athletics are like, on and on. We found it to be a really good tool to move, you know, prospects through the sales funnel, in a way, in terms of bringing them up to speed. Just one example of where we found it to be, you know, really, really helpful.
Absolutely.
We have some questions from some of our attendees that I wanted to source. One attendee asked, how do you filter out invalid clicks and traffic through YouTube ads and YouTube Shorts?
Anyone, you guys want to take that one, or I can handle the YouTube portion of it. It's up to you guys. I'm happy to take the YouTube portion. Can you repeat it, Amy? How do you filter out clicks and
Sure.
traffic?
How do you filter out invalid clicks and traffic through YouTube ads and YouTube Shorts?
I mean, there are a lot of differing opinions on the validity of clicks on either. I think we brought up earlier, there are sometimes some clicks on TikTok that are question marks. I know that in YouTube's new demand gen format works extremely well, so well that some people question the validity of clicks. I don't think there's a foolproof way to know exactly what is a valid click or not. I think we just have to look at all of these things as apples to apples. And if you got, you know, 10,000 clicks on YouTube and 20,000 on TikTok, that you just know apples to apples, this one is working better, and no one should take each click number as the holy grail. I don't know if Chris or Melissa have anything to add to that.
Yeah, there's block lists and IP exclusions. There's also, third party fraud detectors that will use and engage with like ClickCease that are out there that help us with that. We have a great hands-on keyboard team, like I mentioned, social wise and search wise, that really are also manually going in and checking the bid ad nauseum, the frequency capping. There's just signals there that you can kind of catch on by doing this for so many years. Our experts have been hands-on keyboard for 20 years, so they know what to watch for and look for. So there's the technology side, there's the partner solution side, like Pixability, and then there's the true practitioners on our side of the house that all work together in tandem. It's not a perfect science, unfortunately. And I think just fraud in general is a bigger issue within the landscape that everyone's fighting with right now, and something as part of the IAB that we're trying to work through as well to figure out the guidelines for.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And Amy, I just saw a question come in from Scott. And Chris and Melissa, you're welcome to chime in too. He says, do you see a mix of brands boosting their popular organic shorts and planned campaigns leveraging shorts? Yes, I think this is again something both Chris and Melissa have seen, but we work with a company, Culture Pop, which is a soda brand, although they're more healthy so they don't always like calling themselves soda. And they have really heavy organic shorts content, and they strongly recommend to everyone to not just, it's the old adage, you don't just like post something and hope it goes viral. You should always boost it with paid. So for an agency out there, if you have clients that have great organic shorts content and they're not putting any paid behind it, there's a lot of data, and we can share it on how that helps, to answer your question, Scott. Chris, Melissa.
Yeah, I was going to say, just across the board, if you've got some organic content that's working somewhere, to your point, Matt, put some dollars behind it and get it working harder for you. And this doesn't have to just be content within the platform. It could be, TikTok content, organic TikTok content that can come over to shorts. It can cross the channels themselves. But yeah, whenever you see a piece of organic content that starts to catch fire, just giving it a little extra boost can always be helpful.
Awesome. I'm also happy to answer the one from Marielle.
Yeah, please do. We have a bunch coming in, so
asking why do we think some advertisers don't use shorts? And I think it is some of what we talked about, Marielle. I think it's the team structure can sometimes get in the way. You have to do it right. If you have two different teams, like one running shorts and one running traditional YouTube, you could risk not having, centralized reporting on how it's working, worried about duplication, et cetera. But we've seen agencies do it right as well. But I think that has been a barrier. And then the other barrier is it's new, and people kind of go with what they're most familiar with. It's, 2024 was the first year. So agencies like USIM and 160over90 jumped on it and experimented with it and saw what worked and what didn't work. And some agencies are a little bit like wait and see attitude, we found. So, but we're seeing more people come over to it. I do know one agency we work with, their social team still hasn't been able to wrestle YouTube Shorts away from their YouTube team. So there's some internal battling that happens.
Yeah, I think TikTok gives advertisers the immediacy.
Is Melissa freezing up for you guys too?
She is,
Purchase.
yeah.
Okay. Melissa, we might be losing you.
In terms of sorry, did you?
Yeah, you kind of were in and out for seconds there. Can you just start that?
Sorry about that.
Part again?
Yeah.
Sorry, everyone. I also think that
Still freezing up.
Still freezing up, Melissa.
For TikTok, for advertisers, is that impulse shopping buying too.
Yeah.
Melissa, we're gonna get
Type it
your
in the chat.
we're gonna get your thoughts when we distribute this content after for
Yeah.
anything, since we seem to be losing your connection here. But we do want to hear your feedback on that, so we will follow up. Yeah, and if you want to send through your thoughts via the chat or to us directly, we'll circulate it to attendees after the session.
Yeah. And folks
Matt,
are welcome to reach out to me, and I can
Yeah.
connect you with Chris or Melissa, or we can answer your questions, some of which we didn't get to. I think I can answer this last one real quick. Yeah, so Kashif is asking, our paid search team owns YouTube. We're less familiar with shorts. Yeah, and so we see a lot of that too. If a paid search team owns YouTube, they're great at using Google Ads, and they might not know shorts because it's kind of a separate thing. But Amy, you said you pass on these questions to us,
Yep.
and we can kind of answer them directly.
Yeah, we're at the 2-minute mark. So before we dive into any other questions, what we'll do is we'll gather all these together, Matt, Chris, and share them with you to answer kind of that way, which we can circulate to the attendees when we share out the content after the session. Melissa just dropped in the chat her response. I can read that now. She was trying to say the immediacy of TikTok with impulse buying and native integration with shopping platforms gives advertisers confidence.
Yeah.
So that was what we missed.
Yeah. Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you, Melissa. And I know there are some other questions that we didn't get a chance to. So we'll share this recording. We'll share this deck. We'll pass along Chris, Matt, and Melissa's contact information. And you can reach out to us at the Forays as well if you'd like to send any other questions that you didn't have a chance to enter into the chat. But with that, I will thank you, Matt, Chris, and Melissa, for your time today for this great conversation. Thanks to all of you for joining. And we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Have a good day.